Big changes are coming to Opportunity Zones, and the clock is ticking. Live from the Opportunity Zone and Multifamily Investing Summit in Richmond, Virginia, an event co-hosted by OpportunityZones.com and Capital Square, I moderated a panel that tackled the biggest issues facing Opportunity Zones today. With the program's expiration looming, Congress is currently debating a massive tax package that could reshape OZ policy for years to come. On our panel, we covered everything from the House Reconciliation Bill and Senator Tim Scott's legislative priorities to new data showing over 300,000 homes built because of Opportunity Zones. This panel dives deep into what's at stake, who's leading the charge, and how these decisions will ripple through the investment and housing landscape for years to come. Enjoy.
May I now ask our panelists to come join us up at the front. We are pleased to have Jimmy Atkinson with us today. There are few practitioners in the OZ space who have not heard of Jimmy. He provides invaluable content through his podcast and email distributions. And our panelists today are all experts in the OZ space. National experts in the OZ space and have played meaningful roles in the formation of this program and continue to be at the center of how this legislation is evolving as we speak. Thank you for being here and for advocating for a program that has brought tens of billions of dollars to neighborhoods across the country. And Lewis, come join us too. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Natalie, for the introduction. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning here in Richmond. I'm really excited to get us started. As a lot of you probably know, Opportunity Zones is a perishable tax incentive program. It's currently scheduled to sunset after the end of next year, but there is very meaningful tax legislation pending in Congress right now that would do a lot of good work for renewing the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and possibly even renewing Opportunity Zones as well. Who in here, show of hands, is at least somewhat familiar with the House version of the bill and particularly the OZ component of the House version of the bill? Lewis doesn't like the House version of the bill. All right. Well, as Natalie mentioned, I'm Jimmy Atkinson. I'm the founder of OpportunityZones.com. I'll be moderating the panel today, and I'll do a quick introduction of all of the panelists right now. Instrumental in this Opportunity Zone program even coming into existence in the first place is Senator Tim Scott, and we're joined by Senator Tim Scott's tax counsel, newly rejoined Senator Tim Scott, Shay Hawkins. We're happy to have you joining us today via Zoom. Thanks for being here, Shay. A former Senator Tim Scott staffer is also on the panel today. That's Emily Lavery. She's a federal tax lobbyist at Fulcrum Public Affairs these days, and she has a lot of policy recommendations from her stakeholder group that we'll be hearing a lot about. She has some ideas about how to make OZ 2.0 even better than what the House has done so far. Also joining us today is Catherine Lyons. She is the Director of Policy and Coalitions at Economic Innovation Group. EIG was instrumental in conceptualizing Opportunity Zones a couple years before it was included in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act during Trump's first term. So her group was in at the ground floor of Opportunity Zones. We wouldn't be here today without her support and her group's support, most likely. And of course, you know Jay Parsons already, and I think you know Lewis Rogers, too. So I've talked a little bit about Opportunity Zones legislation. We're going to be talking a lot more about it during the course of our discussion today. We'll try to save 10 minutes or so toward the end of our hour for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, hold them to the end. We'll do a show of hands, and we've got a microphone we'll pass around too to take some questions. But I wanted to get some broader context. Where are we currently in the process with budget reconciliation? What is budget reconciliation? What has the House done? What is the Senate doing now? So to walk us through that, Shay, wanted to turn to you. Can you tell us, give us a little lay of the land. What has the House done so far? And what is the Senate going to be working on over the coming weeks here?
Sure. I appreciate you guys having me. I'm going to stay on for as long as I can. And we are in the middle of a budget reconciliation process here on Capitol Hill that's designed to extend the tax cuts, the expiring provisions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and also to incorporate a series of additional priorities, from everything, from the border to some entitlement reform and clawing back some of the provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. So the budget reconciliation process is designed so that Congress can pass a bill dealing with the fundamental operation of government, a budget, without needing 60 votes in the Senate. And so it's something that can bypass the 60-vote process if you are focusing narrowly on budget issues. And so, in the House, there's not much difference in the way they will proceed on a bill like this than what you would see normally. They need, 51% of the votes, and they can pass a bill that will then come to the Senate for consideration. Now, on the Senate side, again, here in a typical bill, it's not a judicial nomination. One senator can pretty much, hold a bill up. And you really need 60 votes to get around that one senator. So with budget reconciliation, there's a process by which you determine that everything in a bill, is budget oriented, meaning it has to have, every provision has to have a budget effect that outweighs its policy effect. So we're not able to change policy. If I wanted to, affect something regarding gun rights or abortion or something like that, I can't include that in a budget reconciliation bill. And the fact that it, whatever I propose has some tangential effect on the budget won't be enough. The budget implication has to, its effect on taxing or spending has to outweigh the policy implication. And so that, whether or not something fits into that framework, whether or not it has, a budget implication that outweighs a policy implication, is determined by the Senate parliamentarian. And once that Senate parliamentarian goes through the entire bill and says this has, an appropriate budget effect, this doesn't, at that point, the members can determine if they are going to actively challenge the pieces that have been determined to not have, an appropriate budget effect. If those pieces were to go unchallenged, then they would proceed with the bill when it's passed. If they are challenged, and they're challenged successfully, the entire provision they're a part of, is actually in jeopardy.
And so sorry to cut you off, Shay, but the good news is
yes, sure.
All of the opportunity zones provisions would have direct budgetary impact. So all the opportunity zone stuff that the House has packaged into this reconciliation bill will go through, and the Senate hopefully will massage a little bit. We'll talk about some core policy recommendations that some of us on the stage here have. But Shay, I think what might get stripped out, correct me if I'm wrong, is any reporting. So any reporting and transparency.
Wasn't in there originally.
Wasn't in there originally.
Budgetary.
Wasn't in there originally because the reporting doesn't have a direct budgetary impact. So do you expect that any reporting language that the House did include in their reconciliation bill may get stripped out again here? And then maybe you can talk a little bit about, Shay, also what is in the House version of the bill, and to whatever extent you can, tell us what Senator Scott's priorities are for advancing the bill forward.
Sure. And what I'll do, I'll talk about the House bill, and anything that I leave out, I'm sure the rest of the panel will be able to, will be in a position to weigh in. So, as you mentioned, the House can pretty much put, whatever they want in their bill. When it comes over here, if it shows up on the bill that we work on, then the Senate parliamentarian is going to have a say there. And so, when we look at transparency reporting in 2017, that was removed based on these budget effect issues. The hope is that we can word produce language that demonstrates that that there is a budget effect this time, kind of taking what we learned in 2017, excuse me, and improving that language. So on the House side, the House bill would extend opportunity zones for 7 years, and notably, it would end the current zone designations 2 years early in order to begin the new, kind of 7-year cycle from January 2027 on to 2033 immediately, because the committee had concerns about Treasury administering 2 sets of opportunity zones. So obviously that's a concern, but that's what the House bill did. The House bill also gave an additional incentive, a 30% step up in basis over the 7 years to investments that occur in rural areas according to their definition. The House bill also lowered the threshold for substantial improvement in rural areas to 50% from 100%. The House bill also directed governors to essentially designate, up to a third of their opportunity zones from rural areas, again, according to their definition. The House bill also allowed for what they define as ordinary income. And so they allowed for that to be invested in opportunity zones with a cap of $10,000. The House bill also tightened up the zone designations themselves, lowering the AMI threshold from 80% of the state average down to 70% of the state average, and they eliminate contiguous census tracts. And so, Senator Scott looks at the House bill, as a great start and a foundation to build on. They take the fact that many things were messaged, the idea of including non-capital gains, the idea of plussing up rural areas, the idea of extending the policy, are all things that, are very attractive, and is a real improvement over the fact that in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, OZs weren't even mentioned in the House bill. So, all plussed up over that, and very encouraging. But there's some modifications, some key things we will want to do to build on that bill over on this side. And others will be able to kind of emphasize these points in detail. But, in short, permanence for the policy is Senator Scott's top priority. We definitely would not want to, undermine existing investments in opportunity zones or, potential fundraising by cutting off the existing zones 2 years early. So we want to figure that out. We would also want to significantly raise the threshold for non-capital gains. We want to look into that definition of ordinary income and make sure that that the drafters are clear that Senator Scott's priority is after-tax income that is only eligible for the permanent exclusion after investing in an opportunity zone for 10 plus years. We would also, want to look, if possible, to solve the interim gains issue. To look to bring in some support for operating businesses through fund-to-funds investing, and allowing existing property, to count towards something that can be substantially improved for existing operating businesses. We'd also want to put in some provisions that would support affordable housing, allowing original use if you got market rate that you convert to affordable. So allowing that to be considered original use. We want to allow existing affordable housing to to be able to improve that and expand that housing with a lower substantial improvement standard, something closer to what we would see for LIHTC, around 20%. And then we have some community development oriented fixes that we'd love to see implemented. We'd love to see a safe harbor for deposits in CDFI banks, and we'd love to see banks get CRA credit for opportunity zone investing. So that would be Senator Scott's, kind of like wish list over here on this very, very tight timetable. And I'm sure the other panelists can talk more about some of these areas that I've noted.
Yeah, we will indeed. All of those ideas on Senator Scott's wish list are definitely music to the ears of, I think, everybody in this room, Shay. So I commend the House on getting us to this point. As you mentioned, OZs weren't even in the House version of the 2017 budget reconciliation bill. Now that we are a little bit ahead of where we were in 2017, I'm hopeful that the Senate, your office, and your boss in particular can take the ball all the way across the goal line here in many ways. Shay, I know your schedule's tight, so if you have to drop off, we won't hold it against you, but thanks for joining us this morning. I want to turn to Emily right now. Emily, as I mentioned before, is a federal tax lobbyist at Fulcrum Public Affairs, and she was also formerly in Senator Tim Scott's office. You represent a broad stakeholder group, Emily. What are some of that stakeholder group's core policy recommendations that you would like to see advanced by the Senate to address a lot of the technical issues and some of the limitations that are in this current version of the House bill?
Yeah, so there's obviously been quite a bit of an evolution. To Shay's original point, there was a lot of unity around Senator Scott's exact core wish list, right? All of the things that Shay just went through for the last year, 2 year plus, there's been a lot of unity around across stakeholder groups, across industry. That's been phenomenal to see. Obviously, there's been some key developments, namely the House legislation, which leaves perhaps some of those items out and some changes that are less than desirable for certain industries, for sure. I think that's definitely created a shift, as well as the reality that something that Shay also referenced was the bird rule, which makes it impossible for us to do things like reporting, even though they're little or no cost at all and would be incredibly impactful and helpful. Unfortunately, we just cannot do that because we want to be able to avert the filibuster. That, with respect to how that kind of changes what that wish list has looked like, and also the realities and the practicalities of the scoring implications here, is significant. So the other issue that we have Senate side is we don't have a lot of unity on the cuts to Medicaid, the overall budget cuts generally, how we're going to deal with SALT. All of those things will ultimately impact what we can get for opportunity zones. So realistically and practically, the number one thing that we want to see is permanence, without a question. That is a big deal. Securing that is huge. I mean, the new markets tax credit has existed for over 25 years and does not have permanence today. Getting that for opportunity zones within 10 years of its existence is a big deal and would absolutely change the trajectory of the incentive for its lifetime. I think beyond that, obviously avoiding the capital freeze that's baked into the House legislation would be great. I think that that's incredibly important. The faster that we address that,
well, it was nice to hear
the
that.
better.
It was nice to hear that Shay mentioned those. There was two top priorities for his boss, Senator Scott. One, make it permanent. Two, let's put in some transition framework, but go on. What else?
No,
what else is
absolutely.
important?
And I think, again, when we think about sort of the evolution of the unity of the stakeholder group, it's highly reactive and responsive, which is something I love about the OZ community, is that there's so much familiarity there. Because obviously averting a capital freeze wasn't necessarily that was something that was baked into our wish list as we were going into congressional offices for the last year plus. But beyond that, obviously enabling a fund-to-fund structures, allowing for meaningful participation of ordinary income. The $10,000 number just isn't particularly workable.
It's impractical.
I certainly understand and appreciate the interest in democratizing the incentive broadly, and respect the constraints within the House budgetary process and being able to do that to a degree that maximizes essentially the changes and enhancements that we're making. I don't know that that figure is going to really bring about the outcomes that we would really want to see, and could potentially, those spendings could really be spent better, right, on other concepts like fund-to-funds, et cetera. The sixth piece, I would argue, probably rural incentives. There's a lot of push for from the administration and from other think tanks and stakeholder groups. I'm not sure how much of that we'll see kind of survive in the Senate process. And then obviously, we would love to see a solution for interim gains issues. Not being talked about enough, candidly. So just another piece that's sort of floating out there in the ether. But again, hanging in the backdrop of all of this is that scoring top line. So there'll be 2 more meetings today with both President Trump and Senate Finance, as well as the Senate Finance Republicans themselves on this front exactly.
And when you say scoring, for those who just want it in plain English, what does scoring mean exactly? What does that detail?
The cost.
Yeah.
The cost of including each of these enhancements and the price tag fixed to each of those things. The House legislation with respect to the opportunity zones component was rather affordable, you could argue. Some of that was because of the policy choices that they made that I don't want to say gimmicky, but frankly had huge impacts with respect to making it appear much more affordable than it might ordinarily actually be. So those are some of the pieces that we have to continue working out.
And then you talked about interim gains for a minute. This is a big issue for me. It's a big issue for my stakeholder group at opportunityzones.com. I think it impacts business development potentially. What do you mean, what do we mean when we talk about interim gains? What's the issue currently, and how would you like to see it resolved?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways that you could go about resolving it. Again, I think when you look at other pieces and enhancements like permanence, there's a number of ways to go about securing permanence as well. All of those things are going to have a variety of different impacts on your scoring model, and then that's all going to impact how likely it is to be included. The issue with interim gains is obviously when you pull out gains within your fund structure before your 10-year timeline, you're taxed on those gains up front. It makes it, you're not able to reinvest those into your QUAF, and you're not able to garner those same tax benefits. Ultimately, that's really problematic for multi-asset fund structures, for diversified fund structures, for investments into existing businesses, for investments into new COSBs as well, because it doesn't play well with sort of the natural way of doing business. And frankly, it's kind of punitive in that sense, right? So creating a resolution to that would be huge. To the degree that that's possible, I'm just not sure with the scoring top line, which again is a bit of a question mark right now given the current fights both on SALT and Medicaid.
Right on. Well, let's turn to Catherine now. And Catherine has a couple of slides too, if we can get those queued up back there. Catherine, you're going to talk about how the Opportunity Zone policy has worked nationally, and in particular, how much housing it has built so far. So maybe you can walk us through. It looks like your slides are up on the
Sure.
the TV now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have done some research on on the impact of opportunity zones on housing supply nationally. We put out a white paper a couple of months ago that outlined a lot of these findings. We actually have preliminary new data that I'm sharing today, but I do want to emphasize that it is preliminary. We'll be publishing this hopefully soon. That kind of takes us through almost contemporaneous, like through Q1 of 2025. And essentially, what we kind of looked at just generally before we even get into the effects of OZs on housing supply, we looked just generally about opportunity zones, comparing them to other low-income communities, those that were eligible but not chosen, and then kind of just the broader universe of census tracts. And what we find in general is that OZs added roughly 790,000 new residential addresses from 2019 to Q1 2025. Now that's all across all OZs, and that's not just because of the incentive incentive. That's just kind of a general top line number. I'll get into kind of what percentage of those are actually OZ or caused by the OZ incentive in just a minute. But that represents 32% of all new active and vacant or addresses among all low-income eligible tracts, regardless of whether they're designated as an OZ or not. OZs also accounted for 9% of those new addresses across the 2019 to 2025 timeline, whereas if you look at before OZs kind of took place, before the regulations were finalized, so looking at the study period 2014 to 2019, it was only 6.5% across that sample. And if you go to the next slide, you can see here that, once we have kind of lines here that show, when TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, were enacted, when the map was actually certified and sort of regulations were finalized. And you can see here that the places that were ineligible, so generally better off places, are on an upward trajectory. Unfortunately though, the low-income communities not selected are on a downward trajectory. And those that are not selected or not chosen as OZs, unfortunately, are continuing that downward trajectory, despite the OZ policy, because of course they didn't receive that OZ designation. However, for those that were chosen as OZs, you're actually starting to see an uptick. That downward trajectory that that's kind of across the board for low-income places is actually starting to reverse trend once it's actually receives that OZ designation, that sort of treatment, as we'd say in economist terms. So, and the next slide. Really just shows that sort of hockey stick chart that one always hopes for when you're doing a causal analysis around looking at a policy and how it's working. We see here that more than 353,000 new units were added in opportunity zones, and that is because of the policy. So I just want to underscore that. That's almost half of the national housing supply added in these places were actually because of OZs. And we hear a lot, I think, over the years of the critiques of this policy saying, well, it's just incentivizing things that would have already happened anyway, or in places that would have already received this investment. This essentially puts that argument to bed. We're showing here that at least in the use case of housing, OZs are actually causing a great deal of new housing happening in these places that would not have happened otherwise. It's actually changing investor behavior. All of you in this room are a testament to that, and we just heard real world examples of that happening as well. But this also just shows kind of in the aggregate, how meaningful the policy has been for generation of new housing supply. And from a kind of a top line perspective, again, this is 45%. So again, almost half of all of the new housing in these places were generated because of OZs. That's 4% of all new residential addresses nationwide. It's huge. And it's also incredibly cost effective. And I'm sure you all, again, can kind of are witness to this, and the fact that because there's not a lot of overhead and less bureaucracy in your ability to deploy that capital into qualifying projects, it really keeps the overhead and the cost to the taxpayer quite low, especially compared to other programs. And so if we do our cost estimates, it's around $23,000 per unit, whereas some other programs are 10, 20x that. And so that's always the intent of OZs. It was meant to be a very flexible and cost-effective policy, and that is, again, in the case of housing, certainly bearing out to be true.
There's no pre-approval. You set up a fund, you follow the rules, you qualify for the program or you don't, but you don't have to say, Mother, may I have permission, and do a master lease and go to the Park Service about the walls, and it's just there's
no red
all
tape.
The red tape. There's no red tape.
Right.
Yeah.
Those
are big numbers.
They are.
And at a fraction of the cost of similar programs, similar federal programs. And you can imagine this is all done in this narrow window under a perishable tax incentive. Perishable, yeah. That's going
funny.
away soon. And so some people may not have even bothered looking into it. Some investors may not have bothered looking into it. Some advisors may not have bothered looking into it. Some developers may not have bothered looking into it because they can see, okay, this thing's ending in 2026. If Shay and Senator Scott get their way and the program's made permanent, you can imagine what type of impact that would have.
It's a shame because Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was what, the end of 17?
Yep.
We got started in 18. We had no regulations. Then we had some regulations. Then we had proposed regulations.
We didn't final regulations. Then you had COVID hit.
Was it?
Right.
The COVID hit.
fun.
We basically
It's been a
lost
bumpy
the first
road.
4 years of the 10 years. So we haven't really even had a good, fair chance to get started. Give us a chance and you'll see the blossoming of housing all across the country.
And one key thing that I'd like to highlight before we move on, I want to get the market view from you, Louis, and especially the market view locally. But one thing that we haven't discussed is there was an idea floating around in Congress a few years back to extend this current version of the program, maybe push back that deferral date from December 31, 2026 out to maybe 28, maybe even a couple years beyond. It looks like that is unlikely to happen at this point. I think Congress's intent, correct me if I'm wrong, but Congress's intent now on prioritizing permanence of the program, but allowing for a new opportunity zone designation process to take place within the next year or two, basically rolling out a new round of opportunity zone designations. The way I see it is, if they make the policy permanent, what you'd likely see is new rounds of opportunity zone designations, maybe once a decade, possibly with rolling deferral. So no matter when you come into the program, you would get a 7-year deferral period on your initial gain. So there wouldn't be some deferral date written into the code. But all that means is if you're an existing investor or existing developer, you should still count on this program expiring at the end of 2026. That would be the last day to trigger a gain. Anything else to add to our policy discussion before we turn to Louis? Were there any other points that either one of you, Catherine or Emily, wanted to make on this? Or
Yeah, I think just on the last point that you mentioned, the rolling deferral, I mean, this is one, getting back to Emily's emphasis, and rightly so, on SCORE, this is one where it would be great. This has been one of our long-standing priorities as well, kind of smoothing out that flow of capital, because of we've seen a lot of fits and starts for various reasons and various factors. It would be great if we could kind of smooth that out. However, it's likely a very costly provision because you're not seeing all of those gains recognized within the 10-year budget window, which is the very important window for the reconciliation process to be aware of. So definitely would be on the wish list, absolutely. But that's one that gets a little tricky from a scoring perspective too. So.
Right. So we'll see. The Senate's taking it up this week. I think it might end up unfolding rather quickly. Hopefully we'll know a lot more in the next few weeks. So stay tuned. But I wanted to transition from policy now to the market view. Louis, tell us a little bit about what Capital Square has done with the OZ incentive here locally in Richmond and throughout the region, and some of the impact that you have seen your projects make.
Good question. The reporting isn't in the original bill and probably can't be in the new bill, but at Capital Square we hired FTI Consulting, very large consulting group, to help establish the economic impact. The goal of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was to create economic activity, jobs, tax revenue, vitality. And when we build an opportunity zone in Scott's Addition or in Knoxville or in Raleigh or in Charleston, it's not just a building. You're part of a neighborhood revitalizing. Just here, thank you to Grit Coffee. Grit Coffee is a local retailer, right? How many restaurants do we have in our ozone buildings down here? 5 restaurants. Think about the economic activity. It's enormous. The FTI statistics show that we've taken basically underutilized land and made it into highly valuable buildings with very high taxes to the city of Richmond. The mayor, the old mayor and the new mayor love us. We hardly have any kids in school to burden the school system, and we have a $100 million building from what used to be just an old warehouse. We've created thousands of construction jobs, tens of millions of dollars of taxes, and we've helped to revitalize this neighborhood. North King Street in Charleston was already King Street, right? Louis Vuitton, but we weren't on that part of King Street. We're on North King Street. And it's a neighborhood that is being revitalized. And by building the Nickel Hotel, we were just there for a soft opening. We've helped to revitalize a whole neighborhood there. In Knoxville, we were just a piece of dirt across the river from Neyland Stadium, where 110,000 volunteers play football. And cities building a little bridge across, and we've taken a no neighborhood to a neighborhood. And then here it's just phenomenal, the amount of activity and jobs, and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has really worked to revitalize neighborhoods. And it's a little bit concerning if the program becomes rural, because people don't rent, when they're corn cobs. I mean, you're out in Iowa somewhere. If there's not industry, if there's not business, it's great that you can get some special incentive, but nobody can build economically. We still have lenders, we still have investors. It still has to work, and so some of these goals are possibly unrealistic. We have to build where there's activity, right? Where your investors are going to be happy. And that's in these neighborhoods that we're in currently. I hope we don't end up with a new map that is basically going to make ozones defunct. It's possible if you make us, maybe we could build in Hanover, but probably not in Buckingham, unless we want to have a hunting lodge or something. Realistically, if you want to build maximum housing, you need to provide an incentive where people want to live, where there are people who want to live. And that's in these wonderful southeastern neighborhoods and beyond. Definitely can prove the job production. I hope you have the FDI stats to show to Congress that I thought we were talking about 313,000 units, but you said 700,000?
353,000 are what's actually caused by the OZ incentive, yeah. So just an uptick of about 40,000 units in the
That's a lot.
Subsequent quarter, yeah.
And then when you think about the cost of other programs, what was the number, 23,000? How does that work from an economic standpoint? It's less.
It's incredibly efficient. I mean, you look at like the low-income housing tax credit program. There's a couple of problems with it. And by the way, it's a very much needed program. I don't want to get rid of it, but it's by not being a by right program like Opportunity Zones, it allows these costs to spiral because cities just add on these additional requirements and rules that labor rules, environmental impact rules, all this kind of stuff that doesn't otherwise exist for normal projects. And these projects can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. In Los Angeles, it's $1 million per unit. I mean, it's in Opportunity Zones just remarkably more efficient.
Natalie was in San Francisco. What was it like trying to build housing in San Francisco?
Very difficult.
Was it fast?
That was an understatement.
Very slow, very costly.
I mean, if you want more of something, you don't overburden it. You let it flourish. And the current program, you call it by right, which is kind of interesting. The qualification is here's the tax code. You have to qualify. You qualify, you're a qualified opportunity zone fund. It's on the sponsor to qualify. You don't have to say, Mother, may I create a fund? You just have to qualify. So it's really working.
Good.
And we need to keep it up. And the way the ozones have worked for Capitol Square, we find a lot in an opportunity zone where we have excitement, we have conviction. That for us that's in the Sun Belt, but it could be anywhere. All over the country. People who live in the Northeast can find opportunity in the Northeast and the South, but we found opportunity here in Richmond where we live, Charleston, Knoxville, Raleigh. These are phenomenal places to live, work, and play. And we've been able to find picture postcard perfect lots to build picture postcard perfect properties like this one in each of those neighborhoods. And we buy a lot. We go out to the lending community and we negotiate a construction loan. Sometimes I'm on the hook. Sometimes I'm less on the hook. We need to make sure they're non-recourse loans, but whatever it takes to get a construction loan, we put a fund together, one property, one building, one pro forma, one plan for this building, not a whole bunch of properties thrown in, not a blind pool. Some of our competitors, big companies that do $1 billion or $2 billion, will do a blind pool, and they'll say we're going to build this and that and the other thing, and who knows what you get. We said one building, one plan, one construction loan. We build it, Natalie, with our team in our office will build the building, and when it matures, it'll be leased up, and when it stabilizes, we'll put a permanent loan on, And in every case so far, we've been able to cash out enough proceeds from the refinance from construction to permanent from that value. When you've taken just a piece of dirt, you've made it into an operating building, 90% occupied. We've had enough cash out to send the investors a special distribution. The O zones are mostly tax partnerships. Ours are tax partnerships. It's just a return of capital, not taxable. And now you have a pile of money that you can use to pay your taxes due 12/31/2026.
Yeah, the tax bill is due April of 2027. But
April,
yes.
April of 2027. So mostly those investors have had their cash years in advance. Now, as we get closer to the cutoff, it's going to be harder to build, lease up, stabilize, permanently finance, and send the money back. And that's the problem, is it's getting closer and closer, and it'll impact investors' desires to be in the program. The wealthier investors don't much care. They're looking at that I have to explain those on. What you sold, you have to pay the tax on, right? Now you've invested in a fund, and if you hold that for 10 years, then that can be sold and you have no tax. You get tax forgiveness on the building that's been built. You still have to pay the tax on what you sold. Along the way, there were some tax eliminations, but those have gone away. And now we're just at the end of the first program. And that's the challenge, is the time's getting shorter.
Time's getting shorter, and that's why I think it's crucial. And I'm glad that Shay talked about this, putting in place some sort of transition framework, because we don't want to hinder capital raising and capital deployment over this next 18-month or maybe 2-year period. Unintentionally, right.
And usually you have a transition rule or a binding contract rule that says, for any properties under contract or any properties already acquired, the old rules will continue to apply. The transition will occur for people who are not under contract and haven't bought properties. And that would be okay. I'm worried that the governors don't move quickly enough, and so the old programs will wind down and be funded and built, but there could be a gap of how long does it take to get governors to approve zones?
It took about 6 months.
3 to 4 months.
Last time.
Yeah.
3 or 4 months wouldn't be too bad. If it's a year or two, it'd be pretty bad.
It will take that long.
Well, I want to turn to Jay. I know we're running a little tight on time here. I want to open up for questions in a few minutes, but Jay, just wanted to bring you back in here. When we were doing our prep call for this a week or two ago, you were speaking about how this whole policy has impacted housing affordability in a very positive way, and also allowed for more local home builders, right? Can you just speak a little bit more to that? What's your overall view of how OZs are working for multifamily?
Yeah, a couple quick thoughts, and I won't take too much time here. So number one is, as I shared earlier, is that there's not a lot that's starting right now. And so I think opportunity zones play a really critical role in new construction right now. And so there's a lot of focus right now, I'm sure a lot of you, about impact investing. And I think this is a real chance to be impactful, which is delivering housing for people who need it in areas that need it. I think that's a worthy cause, obviously, but also one that has been beneficial to investors as well. So I look at it as a win-win for communities, for renters, and for investors and developers. And the second point I'll make that Jimmy's alluding to is that, what's I think one of the really fascinating results of the Opportunity Zone program is that it's really it's the primary beneficiaries in terms of developers have been local players who really know their markets, know their cities. And it's I think in some cases really kind of hypercharged smaller developers who had struggled to sometimes compete against the big national merchant builders, because for the big brands, for a lot of them, the Opportunity Zone program, they see the benefit of it, but they already have a structure that's in place. They already have investors who are used to and accustomed to a shorter term return. And so it's a different structure that they're not as excited to go out and build something up. So in turn, that's really allowed, I think, for some smaller development groups to really flourish in developing this model, bringing in investors, bringing in capital that is not involved with traditional merchant building. And so that's, I think, again, Opportunity Zones, I look at, it's not just replacing something that would otherwise happen. You really, I think, bring in new capital with developers who wouldn't otherwise be building these projects. So it's, again, I think truly a win-win with net new housing that is beneficial to all involved.
Those zones have stabilized the real estate market because of the 10-year hold, right? You think of public companies, investing quarter by quarter. We have a decade. We have 10 years to make a property meet its perfect potential. And that really helps stabilize buildings and investments and markets. So there's not a lot of flipping.
Yeah, that's right.
Good. Well, I don't know how much time we have, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, but I'd love to open up the floor for Q&A. So if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll get a microphone over to you. Kyle, right here in the front row.
Kyle.
Let's see if we can get I don't know where the microphone's
Kyle's going to get us a zinger.
floating around. Here comes the microphone.
Kyle, can you stump the chumps?
Well, we'll try. So the way the tax code currently reads is that on the inclusion event, the deferred tax is on the lesser of the amount invested or the current valuation. So 2 questions. One on policy, is that language in the new proposals? And then B for Lewis, couldn't that help with valuations on your properties?
Like a Roth
and
conversion?
Your capital. Yeah.
Is that included? What did the House do to that language? Do you know?
I haven't looked specifically at it,
Okay.
so I would need to double check, but I
Okay.
don't believe
That's
that
in
they
the
would have
regulations,
changed
not in the
No,
statute, right?
That is
Yeah.
statutorily
is?
defined. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting key component of the tax deferral, what you're paying in April 2027, and it's been, I guess, I've ignored it, and I think a lot of other people have ignored it for the first several years of the program because it didn't really matter that much, but now that we're actually getting toward that deferral date, I think it's going to be a very hot topic of discussion going forward. So just kind of to restate what he said, when you defer a gain into an opportunity zone fund, that gain, the liability, the tax liability on it eventually does come home to roost. You have to recognize it on December 31, 2026, so that's payable in April of 2027 to the IRS. And what is the amount that you pay? Well, it's the full amount of the gain. If you came in after 2021, if you came in prior to 2021, you may be able to reduce the gain that you recognize by 10 or 15% if you were an early adopter. But there's also written into the statute, if your fair market value of your investment, the investment that you funded with that deferred gain, has declined, say maybe you have invested in a property that's under construction, maybe it's worth a little bit less than it was when you made the investment. You put $1 million in, I don't know what the fair market value might be on something like that. Maybe it's less than $1 million. Maybe it's 600,000 or 700,000. I don't know. If you can get a fair market valuation of that investment, you only pay on that portion, the lesser of the gain amount or the fair market value. So, and I don't recall if that's in the House version of the bill or not, if they address that.
I think the House version was just a clean date change, essentially.
Right.
So they
Yeah.
maintained the existing structures, the existing language to the best of their ability, and then changed the dates as needed up until 2033 to match with the new map. But again, this is the reason why advocacy is so important, and having conversations with folks like Shay is so important, and especially timely.
Thank you for the question. Who else has one? Right here, second row. Amy, right over here, yeah.
Give us a zinger, John.
Just stand here. On the reinvested gain, the reduction under the new law, is that 30% reduction only for investment in rural areas, or could that be applicable to other areas as well?
Yeah,
I was going to say, yeah,
it's only for rural,
as currently written, it's only for rural areas. So it was designed to essentially provide a rural OZ boost, which is based actually on legislation that we saw last summer. I want to say was the first time it was introduced, or 2 summers ago, 2023.
Yeah, this is something that we've I think long has been a recommendation, because we know Chairman Smith is of the Ways and Means Committee is very focused on making this work even better for rural places, and it's less a designation issue in that there are plenty of rural places that are designated as OZs, but there needs to be a strengthening of the incentive in order to make a lot of these deals pencil, and so that was kind of the underlying I think principle behind the idea of increasing the step up in such a way to 30%, for rural places, was to allow that better chance to pencil in these places that are typically harder to make work.
Would that be a large cost item if you try to get it in for other areas?
I don't.
10, 20%, kind of like the old law?
Yeah, I don't know what I don't know what that exact provision scores. So, but I know that will continue to be a priority for the House side for sure. That plus the lowering of the substantial improvement threshold to 50% for rural areas. Those are the two kind of on the policy side rather than the geographic designation side and the set aside piece. Those are the kind of the two boosts, as Emily said, for rural places.
Shay mentioned that one of Senator Scott's priorities is also on his wish list was to provide some additional incentives for affordable housing as well. So maybe something similar like that might be available for rent-controlled or affordable housing. But
like
I'm
a
not
conversion
exact-
from market rate to certain types of affordable housing. Again, that substantial improvement test and what we heard from stakeholders that are aiming to do more affordable workforce housing is that substantial improvement test is really hard to meet. For existing buildings that you want to convert or keep affordable or make affordable. So that's the problem that Senator Scott's trying to solve there with that priority.
Lewis, what's on the screen right here? Can you tell us
These
a
are
little
the
more about this?
FTI consulting stats showing, let's see what we got here. In Richmond, job impact of 3,720 jobs, Raleigh 1,750, Knoxville 1,500, Charleston 540. This is showing the economic impact, the GDP growth, 400 million. I mean, look at these numbers. These numbers are off the chart. The total annual construction impact, over 2,000 jobs. The total GDP, 197 million. The total tax revenue, 41 million. And we're a relatively small company.
Yeah, these are just from Capital Square's project.
This is just Capital Square on our properties. There's sponsors all over the land who'd like to build big, beautiful buildings. All we need is the code.
And this is that FTI consultant's report that you referred to earlier.
If you want the stats, just email any of us. We'll be happy to send them to you. They should go to Congress to show that the legislative intent is being satisfied. We don't need a regulation or a rule to tell us to report. We want to report. We want to show that we're doing exactly what Congress intended back in 2017.
Good. I think we had a question right here. I don't know where the microphone went. Right here, third row.
All right, here's Vince.
On your right, there you go.
Yes, we have ozones in Tidewater.
Lewis talked about the cash back that he's been able to, and he will be able to provide to the investors in the 4 deals he's had here. I think they're being penalized across the street because new deals that are coming out don't have time to build and stabilize and return to the investor the principal that would be tax-free to them to pay the tax. Is there any way that existing deals coming out now can be helped out here?
I agree with you. I think it is a huge issue that this deferral date is written into the statute. So as we get closer to it, there's less time for projects to stabilize and start producing cash flow back to the investors so they can actually have the cash to pay their tax liability. That's a great issue that you raise. I don't know if Congress is going to address this or not. I think years back we did want at least an extension of this current program by an additional 2 years, which really would have just kicked the can down the road 2 years, wouldn't have really addressed the structural issue with that.
We need a rolling deferral period.
That's why I like the rolling deferral
Every
period
investor
idea.
should have a
One
time
thing
frame.
I'll flag
Go
is
ahead, Emily.
the original intent behind that 2-year extension was it was necessary for a number of reasons, predominantly because it took so long to get final regulations, but then we got hit with COVID.
Right. Yeah.
So that 2-year extension was never meant to be a panacea to these baked in issues that would come to rise when we, approach 12/31/2026.
Right.
Right.
So going forward though, we've talked about this idea of, this is on my wish list, I'd love to have it be permanent, and I'd love to have rolling deferral.
Yep.
Maybe everybody just gets a 7-year deferral no matter which year they come in. But as Catherine rightly points out, that's going to cost a lot. I don't know if the Senate's going to be able to pull that off or not. I know that that's Senator Scott's number one priority, is to make the program permanent. But to address your concern now, I don't think there's anything available for somebody who's trying to raise capital or develop a project right now. Is there, Emily or Catherine? You might know better. Yeah. So unfortunately, no, it is an issue, and this is going to probably result in a bit of a capital freeze over the next couple of years. I know Senator Scott's office is aware of this issue. Shay is very well aware of this issue. And I think they're doing everything they can to put in some sort of transition framework, but what it looks like exactly, we'll find out in the next few weeks here. So sorry I don't have a satisfactory answer to your question, but I think that's what we can do right now. Any other questions from the crowd about OZ legislation or anything else right here?
Thanks. Kind of a follow-up on that. As someone who's looking to deploy capital between now and June of 26, you know, what's the best recommendation? Do I go to an old zone? Do I wait for a new zone? Is there any magic bullet there for?
Do you have current capital gains?
Yes.
You have 180 days, so you better pick a current one.
Well, actually, the way
He's funded a QOF already.
we're funding the fund in July.
Okay.
And he has a year
I
plus.
actually have till June of 26.
Yeah, so at that point, the new map won't be available, I don't think.
Likely not.
Yeah, it's likely that the new map won't be available in 2026. So I think you would be limited to the existing program, unless somebody thinks otherwise. I don't think. Yeah, I think you won't have a choice at that point. You'll have to go with the current map.
I think
Yeah.
the one thing I will flag is just, and Shay mentioned this as well, is timing. So Leader Thune has been fairly vocal that they're really hoping to have at least the Senate product out by July 4th. That'll be highly informative, as we'll be able to see, okay, here's where the House marker is on OZ. We know that they want these rural pieces in particular, and then this is where the Senate body can get behind permanency, and what does that actually look like? Where are the material changes, and frankly, what can we actually afford to do in the OZ space?
Right.
So within the next 4 weeks, we'll have a huge amount of intelligence gained in terms of what we can really expect to get done in reconciliation.
Yeah, a lot of what we've discussed today has been, I would say, educated guesses or informed speculation as to what may happen. But until we actually see what the Senate does over the next few weeks, it's a little bit unpredictable. But we do have some idea of at least what their priorities are, especially with regards to Senator Tim Scott, he was the original co-sponsor of OZs back in 2015, I think, was when the Investing in Opportunity Act was first introduced, and he was instrumental in getting it packaged into the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So it was really great to hear from Shay, and it's great to have Emily with us as well, because she was in his office during that time as well. Any other questions from the crowd here? I don't know how we're doing on time. Let's wrap up. Well, I think that's it then. I'm around for the rest of the day if anybody wants to catch me and talk with me. I think a few of us will be sticking around for a little while longer. So thanks everybody for
What's in
attending
store
today.
for the rest of the day?
What's next, Natalie?
Thank you, panelists. Please don't leave, everybody.